Donc, nous allons reprendre. Je propose de... je vais voir, essayer de gérer l'horaire pour... mais on va au moins se prendre 20 minutes de questions à nos 4 orateurs de ce matin. Je pense que le déjeuner vous a ouvert les idées. Donc, cas échéant, s'il faut que je fasse l'animation, je l'avais dit, je le ferai. Mais je vous propose plutôt que... Je ne vous résume pas ce qu'ils nous ont dit ce matin. Enfin, ils nous ont montré 2 cas. Enfin, si je vais le faire en 2 mots, ils nous ont montré 2 cas. Ils nous ont montré sur le côté de la pêche comment on est face à une situation qui a déjà atteint un certain degré d'irréversibilité et comment il y a des relations plus ou moins simples entre la recherche, la science, la régulation, les politiques publiques. Et ils nous ont montré comment, sur un domaine qui, lui, est en pleine expansion, en plein développement, on est en train de chercher le modèle pour que ça se passe. Donc, c'est 2 cas intéressants et contrastés. Ayant dit ça et vous ayant rafraîchi la mémoire, je passe la parole à la salle pour les questions éventuelles. Je vais même passer le micro, vous voyez au point où j'en suis.
Merci. J'ai une question à M. Philippe Curie. Des chercheurs américains, sur la base d'une étude portant sur 4713 entreprises de pêche, représentant 78% des prises mondiales, ont affirmé pouvoir reconstituer la grande majorité des stocks en l'espace de 10 ans. Si j'ai bien compris, cette affirmation a entraîné de nombreuses polémiques et je voudrais savoir quelle est votre position à ce sujet parce que c'est évidemment quelque chose de très encourageant si cela était confirmé par tous les scientifiques. Je vous remercie.
Alors, la reconstitution des stocks, c'est vrai que c'est une des thématiques importantes en halieutique, surtout pour le... Bon, on l'a bien vu, il y a beaucoup de stocks qui sont surexploités. Et il y a des pays, par exemple, aux USA, il y a une dizaine d'années, ils se sont dit, la première chose à faire, c'est de reconstituer les stocks de poissons qui ont été surexploités. Ils ont arrêté les pêcheries. Et ce qu'on voit, c'est qu'il y a beaucoup de stocks qui ont récupéré et qui sont aujourd'hui à nouveau exploitables sur des bases plus adaptatives, plus concertées, plus écosystémiques, etc. Donc, il y a... En réalité, on va voir toutes les solutions et toutes les solutions de la nature possibles pour la reconstitution. Alors, on l'a vu pour le thon rouge. Vous savez, en Méditerranée, tous les stocks sont à peu près surexploités. On l'a vu, il y a un contre-exemple, c'est le thon rouge. Le thon rouge, alors on l'a dit ce matin, il y avait l'ICAT qui faisait ses propositions de quotas tous les ans. Alors, en 2007, on avait une proposition de quota de 12 000 tonnes. Après, dans l'organisation régionale des pêches, ça se transformait, et puis après, avec les avis politiques et les différentes positions, ça se transformait en 30 000 tonnes, et la réalité, c'était 60 000 tonnes. Donc, à ce tarif-là, je dirais, bien sûr, le stock a été surexploité. On le voyait, il y avait beaucoup d'indicateurs qui étaient vraiment au rouge. Il y a eu une prise de position, notamment de la principauté de Monaco, de l'Europe. On s'est dit, il faut faire quelque chose. Il y a les grandes ONG aussi qui ont vraiment poussé à mieux gérer cette ressource-là. Et qu'est-ce qui s'est produit? On a suivi l'avis scientifique, donc vers les 10 000 tonnes. Et le stock, il y a une bonne nouvelle, c'est que le stock s'est reconstitué donc depuis 2008-2009. Et on voit, il y a quand même des signaux, même si c'est difficile d'estimer, parce que les thons, c'est difficile à estimer, les thons rouges notamment, on voit bien qu'il y a une remontée de ces stocks-là. Donc, en réalité, ça a pris, vous voyez, une petite dizaine d'années. Et donc c'est vraiment la gestion des pêches. La première chose à faire, c'est la reconstitution des stocks. Il y a des mauvaises nouvelles aussi. On le voit bien, la morue du Canada, elle s'est effondrée en 92. Depuis, il y a eu plein d'arrêts de pêche, mais bon, on continue quand même à pêcher un petit peu la morue au Canada. Ça ne doit pas aussi faciliter le processus de recouvrement. Ceci étant, depuis 92, il n'y a pas eu de reconstitution de stock et la morue est toujours à un niveau extrêmement bas puisque ça doit être quelques pourcents par rapport à ce qu'elle était avant les années 90. Donc, il n'y a pas... le monde marin, c'est un monde d'interaction et des fois, il y a des interactions qui font que quand on a ces changements de régime ou ces populations qui s'effondrent, on a beaucoup de mal à les faire récupérer. Ceci étant, dans l'aménagement des pêches, il faut à tout prix viser cette option-là, c'est-à-dire quand un stock récupère, il faut le laisser récupérer, le laisser respirer, pas comme on a fait par exemple en Namibie, où dès qu'il y a une petite récupération de sardines et d'anchois, aussitôt tout le monde tombe dessus. Et le problème, c'est qu'on n'arrive pas à reconstituer ces populations. Donc oui, il faut le faire, et à des horizons de 10 ans. Alors, il y a le niveau européen, il y a oui, au niveau européen, là, c'est un autre... Bien évidemment.
Ma question s'adresse à Serge Bellier. Et c'est une question qui porte sur le concept de pêche en eau profonde. On sait qu'il n'est pas défini, cette notion n'est pas définie aujourd'hui, parce qu'on ne sait pas à partir de quelle profondeur on peut parler des grands fonds. Dans ces conditions, je me suis demandé comment on peut imaginer un régime international des activités de pêche en eau profonde. Est-ce que c'est envisageable quand on sait que le sol marin n'est pas un milieu continu?
Oui, effectivement, le vocabulaire de pêche profonde est plutôt un vocabulaire politique que juridique. Les définitions qui sont données de la pêche profonde varient d'une organisation à l'autre. La FAO, à un moment, retenait 400 mètres, le CIEM 600 mètres, de nombreuses ONG retenaient 200 mètres. Donc, devant l'impossibilité de faire un consensus sur une définition de la profondeur, la réglementation de l'Union européenne s'est plutôt attachée à viser les espèces, en disant telle espèce mérite tel régime de gestion et telle autre espèce tel régime de gestion. Donc on a en fait évité de définir ce qu'était la pêche profonde, parce que c'était juridiquement très difficile. Certaines espèces ont en plus des gradients de vie dans la colonne d'eau qui peut varier pour une même espèce, de plusieurs centaines de mètres. Donc il était très difficile aussi de dire telle espèce est une espèce profonde ou n'est pas une espèce profonde. Donc le compromis qui a été fait au Parlement européen avec le Conseil de dire on considérera comme pêche profonde ce qui est en dessous, ou on interdira plutôt, en tant que pêche profonde, ce qui est en dessous de 800 mètres, était un petit peu une façon de botter en touche pour ne pas régler le problème. De même que la CGPM a interdit la pêche dite profonde en dessous de 1000 mètres en Méditerranée, c'était surtout pour se donner bonne conscience et dire qu'on faisait quelque chose. Donc là, effectivement, on ne pouvait pas non plus définir la pêche profonde par les fonds. Il y a une assez grande diversité des fonds marins qui fait qu'on ne peut pas dire a priori c'est bon dans tel endroit. Par exemple, la proposition qui avait été faite aux Nations Unies d'un moratoire ne visait que la haute mer. Parce que les organisations qui avaient fait cette proposition savaient très bien que si elles avaient visé les zones économiques exclusives, elles auraient mobilisé des dizaines d'États contre la proposition, alors qu'en haute mer, il n'y avait que 4 ou 5 États qui étaient concernés. C'était beaucoup plus facile sur le plan politique à gérer. Donc tout ce débat est un débat qui avait besoin d'être alimenté en matière scientifique, mais c'était aussi un débat très politique qui a été alimenté par la nécessité pour certaines organisations non gouvernementales de trouver une alternative au dauphin qui était un peu trop usée sur le plan médiatique et un certain besoin de se renouveler pour intéresser l'opinion publique. Bon, je pense que ce qui a été fait dans certaines organisations régionales de pêche, comme par exemple à la Camelard, on a interdit le chalutage et on a réussi à le remplacer par la palangre parce que l'espèce était capturable par palangre. Mais on ne peut pas partout remplacer le chalut par d'autres techniques. Donc la question est de savoir, est-ce que le chalut est un engin de pêche dangereux? Et à ce moment-là, il est également dangereux dans les zones sous juridiction des États côtiers. Donc c'est l'engin qui doit être visé et non pas l'endroit où la pêche se fait.
Je vous en prie.
Ma question concerne à M. Charles Beslier. En juin prochain, à New York, il y aura une conférence mondiale pour l'Alliance climat-océan. Il s'agira de la gouvernance des océans. Il y aura un texte juridique et contraignant par rapport aux scientifiques. Qu'est-ce que vous avez préconisé en cas de rébellion des scientifiques en disant maintenant c'est la politique qui gère la science, ils nous imposent un texte, et bien ils n'ont qu'à faire notre boulot à leur place. Merci.
Il y a un phénomène de résonance dans la salle, et comme j'entends que d'une oreille, vous avez compris.
Je reprends la question. En juin prochain.
Attendez, si madame a peut-être deux oreilles qui entendent mieux que la mienne, si vous avez compris la question. Parce qu'il y a toujours ce phénomène de résonance. Ah, vous êtes, bon, ça va. Je ne suis pas le seul à être sourd.
Allez-y, si vous pouvez reprendre brièvement votre question.
Le 5 et le 9 juin 2017, à New York, il y aura une conférence internationale à l'Alliance climat-océan. La première d'ailleurs. Donc il y aura un texte juridique et contraignant qui imposera aux scientifiques la méthodologie, la façon de travailler. Ma question est la suivante. Personne n'imagine quel sera le texte. Mais supposons qu'après avoir signé le texte, les scientifiques se rebellent en disant « Bon, maintenant c'est la politique qui fait le boulot à notre place. Ils nous imposent le texte, comment on doit travailler. Eh bien, ils n'ont qu'à venir faire travailler à notre place. » Qu'est-ce que vous avez préconisé si un tel cas se réalise?
Bon, je crois que cette fois-ci, j'ai à peu près entendu, mais c'est quelque chose que je ne connais pas. Vous connaissez la question?
Madame Salpa, c'est par rapport à l'événement de New York.
En fait, en parlant de texte juridiquement contraignant, ce n'est pas l'intention d'adopter un texte qui soit juridiquement contraignant. Ce qu'il va y avoir, c'est ce qui s'appelle en ce moment un call for action, donc un appel à l'action, qui sera un texte exhortant à prendre un certain nombre d'initiatives dans certains domaines qui sont couverts en l'occurrence par l'ODD 14. Donc bien évidemment que les scientifiques devraient prendre en compte ce texte, mais encore, il ne s'agira pas d'un texte juridiquement contraignant pour les scientifiques.
J'ai le temps pour encore 2-3 questions. Oui, monsieur au fond, je vous en prie.
Bonjour Yves, je voulais vous demander où est-ce qu'on en est sur le respect des quotas pour les États côtiers en Europe, que ce soit la France, l'Espagne, l'Italie, la Croatie ou la Grèce. Et accessoirement, j'aurais une deuxième question concernant la taxifolia, savoir si le problème de la taxifolia a été réglé ou pas. Merci.
Bon, votre première question concerne le respect, si j'ai bien compris, des quotas attribués à chaque État membre dans le cadre des TAC, des totaux admissibles de capture adoptés par le Conseil annuellement. Il faut bien voir que dans le système de l'Union européenne, les institutions européennes qui décident, le Conseil en l'occurrence, a le pouvoir législatif. Par contre, le pouvoir d'exécution appartient aux États membres, sous le contrôle de la Commission en tant que gardienne du traité et du droit dérivé. Donc, il y a un système de communication d'informations qui permet à la Commission de connaître en permanence l'état d'épuisement des quotas accordés à chaque État membre. Quand la Commission constate qu'un État membre a épuisé son quota, elle prend une décision de fermeture de la pêche pour les nationaux de l'État membre concerné. il peut y avoir des fausses déclarations. C'est arrivé pour le thon rouge, en particulier il y a une dizaine d'années. À ce moment-là, la Commission engage une procédure d'infraction contre l'État membre concerné qui passe soit par un paiement en nature, c'est-à-dire que le dépassement constaté doit être remboursé en poisson par l'État membre les années suivantes. Dire, par exemple, l'État membre a dépassé son quota de 1000 tonnes une année, l'année d'après, s'il avait un quota de 5000 tonnes, il n'aura plus qu'un quota de 4000 tonnes. Donc il rend le poisson d'une certaine façon. Une autre méthode consiste à faire condamner l'État membre par la Cour de justice et à lui infliger une amende financière. La France a été condamnée il y a quelques années à 52 millions d'euros d'amende pour un semestre, renouvelable de semestre en semestre, tant que la France ne se serait pas mis à jour pour la pêcherie de merlu. Donc c'est le système, peut-être un peu théorique, mais c'est le système tel qu'il fonctionne dans l'Union européenne. Alors pour la taxifolia, là j'ai aucune réponse.
Sur taxifolia, Colerpa, enfin sur Colerpa, je ne sais pas qui veut prendre. Peut-être juste un micro commentaire additionnel sur ce que disait Cher Julier, c'est-à-dire que rien n'est parfait au niveau de ce qui est mis en œuvre dans l'Union européenne, mais la régulation qui est appliquée dans l'Atlantique Nord-Est est quand même légèrement moins, comment dire, poétique que celle qui peut, enfin, Philippe Curie en parlerait mieux que moi, éventuellement être appliquée dans l'océan Indien ou dans un certain nombre de choses. Bon, donc tout ça pour dire que tout est relatif dans ces affaires-là. Sur Colerpa, Taxifolia, il y a quelqu'un qui veut s'y coller ou...
Je peux dire juste deux mots. Hein. La Colerpa, on en entend parler depuis le début des années 90, grosso modo. Il y a eu effectivement, elle a eu un profil typique d'une espèce introduite qui devient une espèce invasive, hein, c'est-à-dire qui ne s'insère pas dans son écosystème mais a tendance à l'envahir. On avait écrit un projet de recherche sur cette espèce dans les années 2000 et au moment où il a été financé, je travaillais à l'époque en Espagne. Elle avait disparu de l'endroit où on avait prévu de l'étudier. Donc on s'est dit que ce n'était pas une très bonne nouvelle pour notre projet, mais que c'était plutôt une bonne nouvelle pour l'environnement. Il a semblé pendant un moment qu'elle a suivi un profil qui est assez typique chez les espèces invasives, c'est-à-dire qu'elles sont introduites, elles rencontrent des conditions qui font qu'elles explosent, et ensuite leur niche écologique en fait se réduit de nouveau, c'est-à-dire qu'elles s'intègrent dans la communauté dans laquelle elles ont été introduites, et qu'elles se mettent à avoir un profil finalement entre guillemets normal. En l'occurrence pour la colère, il semble qu'on n'est pas encore tout à fait arrivé là, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a encore des oscillations. Une année on nous dit qu'elle est en régression, l'année suivante on nous dit que finalement elle progresse de nouveau par endroits. Il y a une autre chose qui a été découverte par des équipes italiennes, c'est qu'au-delà du clone, puisque c'est un seul clone de Colerpa taxifolia qui se répand en Méditerranée depuis les années 90, il y a une nouvelle sous-espèce de Colerpa taxifolia qui a été découverte par les scientifiques en Italie. Donc, qui l'ont génotypé, qui se sont aperçus que ce n'était pas du tout la même chose que l'introduction de Colerpa taxifolia dont on parle depuis plus de 20 ans maintenant. Et donc, il y a une autre espèce aussi beaucoup plus envahissante que Colerpa taxifolia, qui est Colerpa racemosa, dont on a beaucoup moins parlé, mais qui finalement a une façon d'envahir l'espace qui est encore plus préoccupante que celle de taxifolia. Donc, on est dans un profil d'augmentation des espèces introduites et donc d'augmentation par voie mathématique des espèces invasives qui est liée à nos activités, en particulier les activités de transport pour l'aquaculture, de fret, d'eau de ballast. On sait que les activités anthropiques croissantes font augmenter les espèces invasives. Donc le problème de la Colerpa en Méditerranée, à ma connaissance, est loin d'être réglé. On ne sait même pas si, par exemple, les deux sous-espèces de Colerpa sont capables de se reproduire entre elles ou pas. Et auquel cas, il pourra encore se produire quelque chose de plus préoccupant. Mais on ne le sait pas. Voilà.
Je vais juste une petite précision pour rebondir sur ce qui a été dit sur les quotas. Ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est qu'en Atlantique, il y a 68% des espèces qui ne sont pas évaluées du tout. Donc voilà, donc on les exploite comme ça. Et en Méditerranée, il n'y a qu'une seule espèce qui est sous quota, c'est le thon rouge. Les autres espèces, il y a des tailles minimales. Et je vous invite à aller dans certains petits ports français pour vérifier, par exemple, que la taille minimale du merlu, c'est 24 cm. Vous aurez quelques surprises.
ça, bon. Ouais, moi, juste de mon privilège, juste pour vous poser une question quasiment à tous les quatre. C'est-à-dire d'abord à Charles Sapin et à Sophie Arnaud, c'est-à-dire que ce que vous nous avez décrit, finalement, c'est sur un domaine nouveau, comment se met petit à petit en place un cadre, ou comment devrait se mettre en place un cadre, qui soit à la fois protecteur, partageur, tout ce qu'on veut, et en même temps respectueux de la recherche scientifique. Donc ça, c'est pour vous deux. Et qu'est-ce qui vous fait... Enfin, quand on voit les complexités de mise en œuvre, si je prends simplement Nagoya à l'échelle française, la communauté scientifique hurle déjà à la mort sur la complexité de la mise en œuvre avec la loi biodiversité. Donc, quelles seraient les bonnes manières de faire et qu'est-ce qui vous rendrait optimiste sur la manière de forger ce cadre? Ça, c'est pour vous deux. Et puis, pour vos deux voisins, c'est, compte tenu de l'expérience historique que vous avez sur un autre domaine où, justement, on a dû forger un cadre, quel bon conseil vous leur donneriez, quoi, finalement, et comment vous interagiriez entre vous? Désolé, mais ça va permettre à tout le panel de s'exprimer, quoi. Bon courage. Et après, on change de page. C'est promis. Nous conclurons là-dessus. Non, mais je surveille l'heure, ne vous inquiétez pas.
Bon, alors, Sophie veut que je commence. Alors, que faire dans le développement du cadre juridique? Je pense qu'une des questions principales serait évidemment de prendre en compte les leçons qui ont pu être apprises justement avec le protocole de Nagoya, par exemple, afin d'éviter les écueils qui ont pu être rencontrés. Et dans ce contexte-là, je pense qu'un des aspects essentiels va être de faire participer la communauté scientifique beaucoup plus que ce que ça n'est le cas en ce moment. Jusqu'à présent, je crois, à part, je sais que André Portara est venu une ou deux fois aux réunions, mais la communauté scientifique est encore très peu représentée dans toutes les discussions. Alors je sais bien qu'il y a des mécanismes de coordination au niveau national, que certains scientifiques font partie des délégations nationales, mais c'est pas toujours le cas. Donc je pense il serait très utile qu'il y ait beaucoup plus de participation des scientifiques dans les négociations.
Oui, donc là, je suis évidemment en phase avec ce que Charlotte vient de dire. Et ce que je voudrais rajouter, c'est que peut-être que si on reprend l'analogie des deux piliers, on pense beaucoup l'accès et le partage des avantages en termes spatial. C'est beaucoup discuté en termes spatial, hein, pour les pays en développement notamment. Je pense que c'est important d'arriver à se projeter aussi dans un système d'accès et de partage des avantages en termes temporels. Et c'est ça la conservation. C'est pas seulement de partager avec les gens qui sont ailleurs sur la planète, c'est de partager avec les gens qui seront là après. Et ça, c'est la biologie de la conservation. Donc un cadre qui permette de faciliter l'étude de la biodiversité, tout en assurant l'accès, donc la partie temporelle, tout en assurant l'accès et le partage des avantages au niveau spatial. Et c'est, je pense, ce qui est nécessaire pour maintenir l'équilibre.
Et alors les bons conseils?
Non. Oui, donc peut-être pour conclure, la pêche, moi j'ai toujours défendu la pêche parce que c'est notre dernière activité de chasse d'une ressource sauvage et c'est notre dernier modèle de relation forte avec la nature. Il faut garder la pêche, mais bien sûr, on est obligé de changer. Maintenant, la pêche est sous tellement de contraintes. On l'a bien vu au niveau international, au niveau européen, au niveau national. Alors, donc ce qu'on voit, c'est que le laisser-faire, ça ne marche pas en matière de gestion. Il y a une gestion rigoureuse et on voit dans toutes les pêcheries du monde, toutes les pêcheries qui fonctionnent bien, elles sont gérées, je dirais, sur des bases scientifiques. Gérées sur des bases scientifiques, mais avec toutes les parties prenantes. Voilà, c'est aussi simple que ça. Ça fonctionne. Il y a des modèles qui fonctionnent, mais ces modèles qui intègrent les deux, généralement, ça marche.
Oui, moi je voudrais dire un dernier mot. Bon, je confirme ce que j'ai dit tout à l'heure. Je ne pense pas qu'on puisse enfermer la recherche dans un cadre juridique. On élabore un cadre juridique en s'appuyant sur des connaissances aussi solides que possible, mais il ne faut pas oublier que le cadre juridique que l'on définit doit être appliqué de bonne foi. Et actuellement, la Convention des Nations Unies n'est pas appliquée de bonne foi par beaucoup d'États. et c'est sa principale faiblesse. Tant qu'on aura des États qui font de l'abus de droit et qui attribuent leur pavillon à des navires qui ne devraient pas le porter, toutes les discussions qu'on peut avoir sur l'intégration de la connaissance à la décision politique seront relativement vaines. Bon, je ne sais pas quel est le taux actuellement, mais il y a une dizaine d'années, quand j'étais encore en activité, Greenpeace avait évalué qu'il y avait 2500 navires de plus de 25 mètres qui pratiquaient la pêche sous pavillon de complaisance, et l'OCDE avait estimé que cela représentait un chiffre d'affaires entre 10 millions et 20 millions de dollars. Toutes les mesures de gestion que l'on peut prendre seront vaines tant que ce problème ne sera pas résolu. Ce n'est pas la peine d'expliquer aux pêcheurs qu'ils doivent respecter la loi si leur voisin ne le fait pas. Donc on est dans une espèce de spirale descendante qui fait que la loi ne sera pas appliquée. Donc ne pas se torturer pour faire de la loi qui ne sert à rien. Merci.
Ce soir pour le dîner, si vous avez encore plein de questions à leur poser. Alors, est-ce que je peux appeler les 4 suivants, s'il vous plaît, parce que faut que ça... Bon, je sens que je vais bientôt devoir rendre des comptes sur l'horaire. Et nous allons passer du vivant au minéral. Je vous en prie, venez. Please, come stage. Oui, bon, mettez-le comme ça vous va. Comme ça vous va. Venez. Peu importe, on vous trouvera les... We will figure out who is who. That's not a problem. So please. Yeah, apparently that's you. Okay.
I suppose the panel will be in English now.
Yes, I can. So, I guess for this next panel, we will be in English. Although theoretically, for me, it's forbidden to speak English. First, because I'm such a bad speaker, and secondly, because it's forbidden by the law in France. But I will make an exception. I will make an exception only if you don't tell it in Paris. So, we have 4 speakers for this afternoon. As I mentioned, the afternoon, the second part is devoted to mineral resources. We've dealt a lot with biological resources this morning, and this afternoon that will be mineral resources, both in a national context, in an international context. We will have at the end of the session, I think, an overarching presentation of Michael, which probably will give the general framework. We'll again have links made between technical and scientific activities and geological aspects. So I don't want this time to steal time to my speakers. I will also skip the presentation because you have all necessary information in the booklet. So our first speaker, I guess, well, I hope I'm in the right order. Our first speaker will be Harald Brekke. He's a project coordinator and senior geologist in the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, and he will speak about deep sea mineral resources within this time national jurisdiction, and we will deal with outside national jurisdiction later on. So if you could confine yourself to 20 minutes, if it's possible, and probably we will have 2 presentation, discussion, and then 2 presentation and discussion. Okay, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and especially to Madame Avril, who I know from New York in my first session, first term in the Commission on the Livingston Continental Shelf. She was then the director of Dualas. Okay, I'll speak on marine mineral resources within the national jurisdiction. I'm going to perhaps say some of my statements will be known to you very well. I just will start to open that the seabed of the oceans are divided into 2, basically, the continental shelf or coastal states and the area which is under the jurisdiction of the seabed authority. And the shelf extends to either 200 nautical miles, and then it coincides with the EEZ, or to the outer edge of the continental margin, where it extends beyond 200 nautical miles. And that last provision is the one that I'm going to talk a lot about, and it's also the fact that this is an incentive to map the seabed in those areas. And there's an obligation for states that want to establish such limits to submit that information and then substantiate it to the Commission within 10 years. This is an incentive for coastal states to map. So let's see what, for instance, happened in the Arctic in that respect. This map shows you the availability of seismic lines that was gathered in the Arctic Ocean from the approximately Second World War till 2006. In 2012, 6 years later, this was the result. It's more than doubled with modern seismic data done by the governments of the 5 coastal states around the Arctic because they wanted to establish the limits of beyond 200 nautical miles. And you should also be aware that these data are available to science. So this pushes maritime science. The whole process is actually a good push for the database around the world. But then the 10-year limit was difficult for some states to meet, so there was an agreement among states parties that they could do it by submitting preliminary information. So when you count the submissions that made, the states that have made submissions, full submissions, are about 68, and states where would have preliminary information which is not yet done into full submission are about 15, and potential submitters with a later deadline or not ratified that probably will put in a submission. We are up to about 90 states that will submit, make submissions for the limits beyond 200 nautical miles. This is an example from my own country. We submitted in 2006 and got recommendations back in 2009. And you can see here the limits of the continental shelf now. The red and the pink are bilateral delimitation lines and 200-mile lines, while the yellow, 2 yellow lines here, are actually the limits between the shelf and the international seabed. Now, we don't know how much overlap we will have with our neighbor states yet, but this is the situation today. That means that parts of the shelf is beyond 200 miles, and they are marked here by yellow. In many instances, this is called the extended continental shelf, the ECS. So what does this mean? Well, if you look at the profile here, going from the shallow areas into the deep sea, across the shelf as it is. And you will notice that the shallow shelf and the plateau areas and the slope are inside of 200 nautical miles. While the deep sea, the deep part, the outer shelf is actually the deep ocean and spreading ridges and other features of the deep sea. This is very much typical of all continents around the world. When it comes to oceans, islands, the deep sea part also goes further into the 200-mile limit in most cases. So if you look at this map here, I plotted the EEZ line, the EEZ limits, and also the lines that have been submitted for shelf beyond 2 nautical miles. The lines in yellow are the EEZ line limits of the world, and the pink lines are the outer limits beyond that. That has been submitted, but not yet recommended. So what does that mean when it comes to the partition of the ocean seafloor? If you imagine that this rectangle is the total area of the world oceans, the area, that means the international seabed, constitutes about 53%. The EEZs, the economic zones, which are in green, constitute about 39%. And then the ECS, the extended continental shelf submitted for is about 7, and the ones that are preliminary information is about 1%. That means 8% altogether. So seabed mineral resources, what is it? Well, there are types of it. You have the aggregates and the placer deposits, and then you have oil and gas, and then you have the seabed minerals, which is nodules, sulfides, and crusts. You tend to forget the first category. But in the shallow shelf areas, you will find that, which you can see here on the map, basically these very light blue, almost white colors. You see there are some wide areas in the north, around the Arctic and northern Atlantic, and also in the Pacific, around Australia and further north. The aggregates and placers actually are one of the most important economical resources around the world. And it contains sand, gravel, limestone, and phosphorus, and also what's called mineral placers and even diamonds. And the distribution of them, you can see them on this map, is broadly, as you can see here. They are close to the coast, obviously, like diamonds, for instance. In the case of the Oranje River, diamonds are eroded onshore and brought with the Oranje River down to the delta and deposited together with the sediments. But during that process, they will be concentrated, and they will now produce in diamonds directly from the seafloor. Oil and gas, also associated with these shallow areas. As an example here, again, the Arctic. You see the Arctic basin. It's a deep ocean basin in here, surrounded by shallow shelves all around, from Canada, Greenland, Canada, US, Russia, and Norway. And if you look at the expected resources, done analysis in 2008 by the USGS, you see this map here, again, Greenland, Canada, and then back again. You see that in the middle, in the deep parts, it's all gray. All the resources are associated with the bright colors, the red. The deeper the red, the more resources. So you can see, if you now add the 200 nautical miles in here, you see that the area in the middle, you don't expect any hydrocarbons in that area. So 95% of the hydrocarbons of the Arctic are already inside of the EEZs of the 5 coastal states. So what about the deep sea areas? Well, there you have the seabed minerals, like nodules, sulfides, and crusts. Nodules are found to 4,000 to 6,000 meters, basically, and sulfides from 2,000 to 3,000, and crusts from 1,500 to 2,500. Nodules are minerals that are precipitated directly from the seawater onto the seabed in areas of soft sediment, but far away from continents. And they contain, many of them contain, or expected to contain economically interesting concentrations of certain metals. Today, we have noticed some regions with especially commercial interest. It's Clare and Clipperton zone in the Pacific, and there's a region in the Indian Ocean, but most of it is outside of the shelf, except in an area in the Pacific, around the Pacific Islands, where we would expect such economically interesting nodules to exist. When it comes to sulfides, they are associated with hydrothermal vents, which are volcanic activity. And you find that around what we call the spreading ridges around the world in the deep oceans. And you can see some of it goes inside the shelves, but most of it are outside. But they are actually made, the process behind it is volcanic. What happens is that seawater is drawn down into the subsurface and then circulates and gets heated, and it extracts the metals from the rock, and it is injected in by volcanoes into the seawater again, and it drops out as sulfide minerals. And they are often called black smokers, as you can see here. And they also actually are the place where you find exotic faunas and ecosystems, which now we regard to be also a genetic resource. Anyway, here's a map that shows some of these hydrothermal vents around the world that has been identified. There are much more than this, but you can see that some of them are inside the EEZs of the Pacific states here. Crusts, again, they drop directly out from the seawater, and they precipitate on bare rock. So if you have an high at the seafloor with the bare rock, they will actually get covered by these crusts, which again carry metals, which are economically interesting. Today, we know there are some certain areas that are more interesting than others. One of them is the so-called Pacific prime crust zone here, and also another parts of the Pacific. And quite a lot of that is actually inside continental shelves of those states in the area. But you should see also that on the map, all the black dots and the black ridges, they are highs, and all of them could actually be sites where you would find crust all around the world. So they are spread out. So basically, crusts and sulfides are the ones that you will probably find inside of the continental shelves. And that is, again, typical for the continental shelf from my country. You see the red line here. That is the boundary for what we think would be the limit of the hydrocarbons. The hydrocarbons will then be on the shallow shelf, while the deep parts of the continental shelf carry the crusts and the sulfides. But we haven't started, we have only barely started the exploration for those, but we know they exist there. So this is, would be a typical division of resources in continental shelves around the world. So, but nobody has, until now, produced or exploited any seabed deep sea minerals. That is nodules, sulfides, or crusts. But the first one will probably be within the EEZ of Papua New Guinea, in a field called the Solvara 1, which is, the operator is Nautilus company, and it's over here. And the setup is generally that you will need a ship, production ship, and then at the bottom where the resources are, you will have equipment that will crush the rock, and it will all be pumped up to the ship at the surface. Everything here is now in place. The equipment is made. The only thing they're waiting for is the ship. So they will start probably in 2019. That'll be the first one. Then I think Article 82 was already mentioned by Salpin in her presentation. But it means that this article says that if you exploit anything in the extended continental shelf, that is the area between 200 miles and the limit, you'll have to make a payment to the states parties through the Seabed Authority. In Norway, we actually have issued some licenses through time outside 2 nautical miles. Here in the 21st round down here, and in the 2006 again in the Barents Sea. But the same year, the ones in the south were relinquished. There were no discoveries, but we still have the ones in the north. But we don't have any regulations for how to make the payment. But we stated when the licenses were accepted that as regards production of petroleum in an area outside 2 nautical miles, in accordance with the UN Law of the Sea Convention of 1982, Article 82, Norway is required from and including the 6th year of production to render an annual contribution through the International Seabed Authority, which was established under the convention. The licensee may be required to cover this expense And in that case, the cost may be deducted under the petroleum taxation. That's all that's been said so far. Canada, they actually made a large discovery outside 200 nautical miles on the Grand Banks. And it's so large that it probably will be developed and production will start. But as far as I know, they have not yet any regulations for the payment in place. Okay, so that's basically a walkthrough of the continental shelf and the resources. And just a summary here. The area is under the jurisdiction of ISA, of course. On the continental shelf, the shallow areas, you have aggregates, places in petroleum. In the deep areas, you have polymetallic minerals, which makes up about 40% of the total oceans. And in the ECS, you have only polymetallic minerals. So, and in both cases, you have to make some payments. Thank you.
Thanks for this, I think, very good and comprehensive introduction, because we now have a global overview of what we can find and where and what quantities and so on. So I think that's a very good first picture of the landscape. Now we will move to our second speaker, and Virginie Tassin is a lawyer. She's a doctor of many universities, at least two, I guess, also working as researcher and both as a member of the Paris Bar. So she will speak. So my free translation from the French to the English is between freedom and control, marine scientific research on the continental shelf, or something of that kind. I don't know, but in a way, free interpretation.
I will explain. First, let me say a few words in French. C'est ma langue natale. Je tenais à remercier très chaleureusement l'INDEMER et Madame de Marfy et Monsieur Sacotte pour l'organisation de cette conférence et pour l'invitation à faire partie de ce panel. J'en suis extrêmement honorée. Now let me switch to English. I will talk today about the challenges of marine scientific research on the extended continental shelf. But the first part of my presentation will be actually presenting the regime of marine scientific research on the continental shelf. So I will actually take in consideration what we call the principle of unity of the continental shelf to actually explain the global principles applicable to marine scientific research. So to start with, I'm gonna give you a short overview of the history. It's quite interesting because nowadays we're talking about marine scientific research on the high seas. But what you should actually notice is that the marine scientific research has been first regulated in the Convention on the Continental Shelf by the Geneva Conventions of 1958. And marine scientific research was actually not specifically addressed in the High Seas Convention. The continental shelf was actually one of the first maritime space created after the Second World War, and the exploration and exploitation rights of the continental shelf have been one of the first rights to get secured by states without actually any debates. So under the Convention on the Continental Shelf, there's been a mechanism that has been put in place. First, the consent of the coastal states and a sort of automatic agreement if pure scientific research were actually submitted and if the application was made by a qualified institution. There was also one condition, that the coastal state should have the right to participate or to be represented in the research, and the results of the research should also be published for the general interest of the international community. Following the developments of the law of the sea, when the Seabed Committee started to prepare the third United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, it selected actually the topic of marine scientific research on the continental shelf as one of the key topics to be addressed by UNCLOS 3. And UNCLOS 3, as you know, has been a very long negotiation, and the debates around the definition have been addressed a bit at the beginning of this conference this morning. But basically, just to recap a bit, there was a distinction between pure and applied research, but also between basic scientific research and industrial research, and also research that could increase the knowledge of mankind regarding the marine environment. There was also other issues linked to the economic supremacy and benefits of states, and an opposition and actually worries about the financial capacity of certain states to conduct research and the knowledge of certain states to conduct these research projects. And this actually demonstrated a sort of fear of what the Colombian delegation expressed in 1974 as a fear of neocolonialism. Sorry, it's difficult to pronounce. So as stated by the Colombian delegation, they were fearing an insidious infiltration of a scientific neocolonialism and the monopolization by some powers of the results of science, to the development of which all peoples have collaborated for countless generations, and which therefore constitute their common heritage. This is a very important part, actually, to understand right now the issues of marine scientific research and the regulation. On the top of these fears, there was also a conflict of interest between those who actually wanted to defend their new sovereign rights, and especially the new rights on the extended continental shelf, and those actually were praising for more generally a freedom of the seas and an open freedom for applied research, marine scientific research. So I'm going to explain I hope quite quickly, the mechanism that has been put in place under UNCLOS to regulate marine scientific research. So as we've been saying this morning, there's no formal definition of marine scientific research, and there's actually no mention of marine scientific research in the regime of the continental shelf. That is a regime that is quite short if you compare it to the EEZ or, for example, the area. What you need to understand also is that the regime of the continental shelf is a shared space. So basically you have sovereign rights, exclusive rights of the coastal states, but you have also the freedom of the high seas. And the marine scientific research regime has been built around this tension between freedom and control. So a couple of principles. Marine scientific research could be conducted if it's for peaceful purposes. It's a right that is actually not an absolute right because it depends on the consent of the coastal states. And there's actually also a requirement for marine scientific research projects to not create unjustifiable interference with other legitimate users of the sea. There's also two very important requirements of UNCLOS, which actually could play a very important role in the future interpretation of the Convention and the adaptation of the marine scientific research regime for future activities, is the requirement that appropriate scientific methods should be used and should be compatible with the means of UNCLOS. And marine scientific research should also be conducted in compliance with all relevant regulation adopted in conformity with UNCLOS. So you see that there's a broad, actually, scope of these two provisions. So to get more into the detail, as Mr. Jarmash explained very clearly this morning, the main principle is the consent of the coastal states. And there's two situations. There's a normal situation and other situation, which actually are at the number of 4. The normal situation is that the coastal state shall grant its consent when marine scientific research projects are actually conducted for peaceful purposes and in the aim to increase scientific knowledge of the marine environment for the benefit of all mankind. This consent should be given with no delays and not denied unreasonably, like we said before. What is interesting is actually the provisions of Article 256, which are the 4 other situations. In those specific situations, the coastal state can actually use its discretionary powers to actually refuse to grant its consents. So I'm going to go through these 4 actually scenarios and explain a bit more in detail what it entails. What is also interesting is on the top of UNCLOS, there's been a revised implementation guide to UNCLOS that has been published that is shedding a bit of light on the way these scenarios should be or could be interpreted. So the first situation is when a marine scientific research is of direct significance for resource exploration and exploitation, whether living or not living. So basically, if a research project is falling under this situation, the coastal state can refuse to grant its consent. There's also an exception to this rule, specifically for the extended continental shelf. For the extended continental shelf, the coastal state should not deny marine scientific research application, except if the coastal state wants to actually create specific area at any time. It should be made publicly for exploration and exploitation. And I will explain a bit later. So basically, in this first scenario, why the coastal state should actually not grant its consent? Well, because this type of research could be producing actually data enabling resources to be located, assessed, and monitored. And then it will enter in direct conflict into the economic interest of the coastal state for the exploration and exploitation of its mineral resources. If we move to the second scenario, it's the case of marine scientific research involving drilling, uses of explosives, or introduction of harmful substances. So in that case, it's the same. This type of research could actually give indication of direct significance for exploration and exploitation. Third scenario, marine scientific research involve artificial islands, installation and structures, and it actually sent back to the reference of Article 60 and 80 of UNCLOS. So in that case, it's the case where marine scientific research will actually be in direct conflict with the right of the coastal state to actually build up artificial islands, installation and structures for the exploration and exploitation of its continental shelf. And the revised guide to the implementation of UNCLOS is actually explaining that the wording of Article 60 and 80 referred to in this provision will seem to imply that they refer to stationary installations and structures, including those penetrating the surface of the sea, as well as those remaining entirely subsurface. So it's quite broad. The last scenario is when a marine scientific research project contains inaccurate information, which is quite vague, or when a marine scientific research project has outstanding obligation. So same, the revised implementation guide actually mentioned that the issue with this is that the provision only refers to the nature and objective of the project as the information, and nothing is said regarding the other information that should be provided to the coastal states, which is actually a bit annoying, because if you take in consideration, for example, the necessity to provide environmental impact assessments, these environmental impact assessments are actually essential to be able to evaluate if you're in the normal situation, so the first one, or the other situation where actually the coastal state can refuse to grant its consent. So briefly, the main obligation when you want to conduct marine scientific research on the continental shelf is that you have to provide information to the coastal state to make sure if you're in the normal situation or in one of the 4 scenarios that I've explained. The UNESCO actually prepared a sort of checklist that is available on the internet, and a lot of states are actually referring directly to this statement in the application procedure. It's the case of Australia, for example. Of course, if a marine scientific research project does not comply with the obligation and the information that has been given to the coastal states, then the coastal state has the right to suspend or cease directly the activities of marine scientific research. There's also a right of participation and representation of the continental shelf that remains and is very important, and is actually very broad, because the coastal state can actually be required to participate or be represented in the project without any payments of remuneration to the scientists, and without obligation to contribute toward the cost of the project. And it's the case, for example, of Norway. For certain conditions, it's just a way to show you all the requirements that could be actually added to the condition to actually have the consent of the coastal state to conduct marine scientific research. So you can be actually required to give preliminary reports, final results, access to all data and samples, and of course also assessments of this data, because to have data is actually not enough. The assessments and the experts to be able to analyze the data is often more important. You can have also the requirement to make the research results internationally available, and remove also the marine scientific research installations and equipment after the completion of the research project. So you see all the requirements, and if you think about all these requirements and the 2 scenarios that I gave you, the normal situation where it's supposed to be no problem, and the second situation when you have the 4 scenarios who actually could clash with the exclusive rights of the coastal states, you can see that there's a lot of requirements and a lot of discretionary powers of the coastal state, actually. And this is reflected in the settlement the dispute settlement provision of UNCLOS. So if we take the dispute provision settlements regarding any interpretation issues of marine scientific research, it should be solved and settled in accordance with Part 15, which is normal. But basically, pending the settlement of a dispute regarding marine scientific research, the marine scientific research project will need to have the express consents of the coastal states. We're talking right now about express consents. And actually, in the main provisions giving the authorization and consent principle, we're not talking about express consent, we're talking about consent. And Monsieur Jarmache actually highlighted very well the difference between the two. So you see that actually the dispute mechanism is actually a clear blockage mechanism from the coastal states in case there's a dispute regarding the marine scientific research project. So basically you see there's a tension that I said before. Marine scientific research, the regime has been built around the tension between the protection of sovereign rights of the coastal states and the freedom of the high seas. So actually, let's move to the specific case of the extended continental shelf. Well, the extended continental shelf is, of course, also a shared space. So you have the interaction between the freedom of the sea and the sovereign rights. And there's a very strong interaction with the surface and water column belonging to the high seas and the seabeds, where there's exclusive rights but limited jurisdiction of the coastal states. The main issue is actually the articulation between Article 77 and Article 76. Basically, and I think Michael will explain it very well, in case you have no extended continental shelf claim, that means that the marine scientific research project that should be conducted beyond 200 nautical miles will be under the regime of the area. Makes sense. If you have an extended continental shelf claim, then the question is, if a state do not need to proclaim or exercise any activities to exercise its sovereign right according to Article 77, can they regulate marine scientific research without having defined and published the outer limits of its continental shelf? Well, to my interpretation, if you read strictly Article 77, and as a reminder, the rights of the coastal state do not depend on occupation, effective or notional, or any express proclamation. And the coastal state doesn't need to explore or exploit its continental shelf to have exclusive rights. So basically, that means that the coastal state could actually regulate marine scientific research without having defined and published the outer limits of its continental shelf. Why? Because the regulation of marine scientific research actually depends on the jurisdiction of the state and not on the limits of the continental shelf. But it's, of course, highly recommended to publish the outer limits of your continental shelf when you can. So actually more technical issues is the potential disputes of marine scientific research projects on the extended continental shelf. So the first scenario, of course, there's plenty of different scenarios, and I just picked a couple. The first one is actually the case of a state, for example, X, who is willing to conduct marine research activities on the extended continental shelf of state A. It's actually following a normal situation for peaceful purposes. It's for the benefit of all mankind. So basically, the state A should grant its consent very quickly, and not denied unreasonably its consent. But there's one problem. State A is in the process of defining the outer limits of its continental shelf before the Commission on the limits of the continental shelf. And there's a state B who has actually overlapping claim and has refused to give its consent to the Commission. So basically, the Commission is blocked and the definition of the extension of the continental shelf is blocked before the Commission. So there will be no definition and maybe a delimitation between the two states, which has been the case, for example, from Bangladesh and Myanmar. So the particular issue with this example is the articulation between the length of the definition and delimitation procedures versus the increasing emergency need of scientific data for any purposes. Could be marine spatial planning, the impact of mining activities, exploration, exploitation. And what you need to know also, it's usually when you have disputes of this type, it's also because this area is quite rich in resources. So it will be actually quite interesting to conduct marine scientific research projects in that area. So what should state X do? Well, of course, seek first an interim agreement with each of the states, or both will be actually even better. But what happens if they both decline? Does it mean that marine scientific research is going to put on hold just before disputes that could actually last for a long time? Well, state actually X could actually think and consider of bringing a dispute settlement procedure before the ICJ class or international tribunals for actually the violation of international cooperation, favorable conditions to put forward for the development of marine scientific research, and the cooperation also through the conclusion of bilateral and multilateral agreement. So you see that basically the regime of the marine scientific research, especially for the part of the extended continental shelf where there will be a lot of disputes in the coming years, has to be understood like globally. Other disputes could be linked, for example, to the interpretation of what is an inaccurate information or outstanding obligation, which is extremely vague, as I said, especially regarding the environmental impact assessment. So, for example, inaccurate information could be considered when you launch an application and you don't give enough grounds, scientific grounds on the environmental impact of your research. Could be also linked to the specific areas, the way you establish the specific areas of the on the continental shelf. And there's lastly another point that could be interesting that has been actually pointed out in the two other panels is the protection of the marine environment. So if you actually remember the 4 scenarios that I gave you, there's one paragraph saying that basically when marine scientific research projects involves drilling on the continental shelf, the use of explosives, or the introduction of harmful substances into the marine environment, the coastal state can refuse to grant its consent. But basically, with the scientific knowledge that we have, this provision is not wide enough to include all the environmental impact issues and the way the coastal state could actually refuse to grant its consent for the protection of the marine environment. So does it mean that the coastal state actually can't refuse marine scientific research project if they're actually able to put in danger the marine environment? Actually, no, because you need to go beyond the 4 scenarios that I gave you and integrate the broad provision of UNCLOS for the protection and preservation of the marine environment. You have also to take into consideration the duty of prevention and the precautionary principle that has been recognized as a part of international customary law by the advisory opinion of the Seabed Chamber. And the duty also to conduct marine scientific research projects in compliance with all the regulations adopted on the basis of UNCLOS. So that includes also those protecting the marine environment. So very quickly, I've been building up a table showing like all the known impacts of mining operations. They're actually often drivers for research. So it's actually highlighting the importance of research and also the importance of environmental impact of activities. So research activities, but also prospecting, exploration, and exploitation. So you have, for example, the increase of vessel activity pollution, sediment plume from seafloor operation, to the loss of essential habitats. So it's just, it's very broad, but it's just like showing basically all the different impacts. And this table has been put together by the Secretariat of the Pacific Community in 2016. So quickly to conclude, 2 more slides. The new developments. So you see that there's a very interesting relationship between the consent of the coastal state, which has a lot of discretionary powers, and the freedom of the high seas, or the remaining freedom of the high seas, where there's a tendency now actually to put together guidelines to promote and facilitate marine scientific research. And the Secretariat of the Pacific Community has been actually publishing in 2016 a regional scientific research guidelines for deep sea minerals, which is actually identifying best practices, research techniques, and it's a sort of guide to put in place domestic regulation and policies. And it's actually simply implementing the provisions of UNCLOS. Because according to UNCLOS, you have a duty to cooperate internationally and to promote and facilitate marine scientific research. It's also a way to give the opportunity to coastal states to step up and better implement UNCLOS and contribute to the general interest of the international community by encouraging marine scientific research, respective of the marine environment. Very quickly also, it's interesting to note that the international agenda is really pushing towards the development of marine scientific research. So you have the Agenda 2030 that we've been talking about this morning, and SDG 14, so I'm not going to say what's been, because we actually explained this morning. You have also the UNESCO that has been, I think 2 weeks ago, a week ago, that made actually a call for ocean research decades. In a way to implement actually Agenda 2013. And there's also, of course, the BBNG negotiation, which will be crucial for the regulation of marine scientific research, also because they, of course, will need to take into consideration the interaction between areas beyond national jurisdiction, so the high seas, and areas within national jurisdiction, and, for example, the impact of activities on the extended continental shelf. Because, as I say, there's a strong interaction with the water column and the surface. So to conclude, the big picture. Well, traditionally, the law of the sea has been built around the problematic freedom versus control. And as highlighted by Prosper Veil a couple of years ago, states have always been and are still are actually obsessed by their territory. Why? Well, the gain of power, increased superficie, geostrategic placements. States can actually have more weight on the international agenda and the international scene because of the control they gain thanks to their space and territories. But there's one condition for this. The condition is actually to be able to promote their role, responsibilities, and liabilities in the management and regulation of this space. So this is actually the problematic. This increased power of coastal states could actually give the opportunity to better implement UNCLOS and preserve the marine environment. So there's a new role for coastal states in the future, and I believe that the BBNG negotiation will actually highlight the increasing role of the coastal states in the regulation, implementation of UNCLOS, and protection of the marine environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have time for a few questions. So, François Galgani.
My question is to Virginie Tassin. Do you think there could be some common tool, I mean, filling a form and submitting it through an internet system somewhere, managing all authorization to work in a different part of the, environment and so on? Something like a coordinated process, submitting a form through internet, for instance, and to send to the different countries, a common form that may be the same scheme for all the countries and so on. Could be something possible to do that, or? Yeah.
Merci. It's what I said, actually. The UNESCO has prepared a sort of form gathering all the information that should be submitted to the coastal states. And it's really the standard form. So you have like a list of all the information, so nature, objects, means, methods, start date of the project, expected departure dates, and I think there's more. And then on the top of it, you have all the different conditions that I've highlighted that the coastal state should, at its request, add up to all the information. So it depends. Then the domestic legislation works, and the coastal state will pick if it wants to make it very complicated or quite simple and just apply strictly the UNCLOS.
Something, and that under the control of Harald, it seemed that the government of Norway had prepared a kind of model for states to fill up in order to present their authorization in a model form. I went through that, I saw it, unfortunately I could have taken it, but I remember it was quite well prepared. That could be something also could
Yes,
help.
that's correct. We do have a form that has to be filled out by any applicants that wants to do research on the continental shelf. That's correct, yes.
Oui, merci. Je m'adresse à Madame Tassin. J'espère qu'elle ne m'en veut pas si je pose ma question en français. D'accord, ok, parce qu'il y a des cabines d'interprétation qui font un excellent travail. Et donc je voudrais poser ma question en français. D'abord, je voudrais rappeler que la demande de recherche scientifique, même dans le cas d'un plateau continental étendu, est le fait d'une relation entre États. Donc c'est un État qui demande à un autre. Il ne faut pas laisser se développer l'idée que ce serait peut-être l'émanation d'un contractant potentiel qui lui demanderait d'aller faire quelque chose, notamment de la recherche scientifique, sur un plateau étendu. Ça, c'est juste un rappel pour le cadre. La Convention est une convention qui règle les relations entre États. Ma question maintenant, ce commentaire étant fait, ma question, mais elle est très simple. C'est à propos d'une des diapos que vous avez montré, peut-être du commentaire qui a accompagné cette diapo. C'est une question, c'est-à-dire je ne suis pas certain d'avoir compris. Avez-vous laissé entendre que s'agissant du plateau continental étendu, l'État côtier ne pourrait éventuellement réglementer ou envisager l'autorisation d'une recherche scientifique que sur la base d'une consultation de la Commission des limites du plateau continental, de sa recommandation. Il m'a semblé que vous avez dit quelque chose dans ce sens-là, même s'il y avait un point d'interrogation que j'ai entendu et que j'ai vu sur l'écran. Donc c'est ça que je voulais vous demander. Et en fonction de votre réponse, je me permettrai de demander au président Jacques de reprendre la parole. Merci.
Oui, oui, bien sûr. Alors, non, en fait, pour vous expliquer, j'ai voulu soulever le cas où, compte tenu de la lenteur de la procédure devant la commission des limites du plateau continental, où tout le monde sait en fait que pour avoir une recommandation, cela prend plusieurs années et qu'il y a une queue absolument phénoménale pour avoir la recommandation, qu'est-ce qui se passe dans le cas où il y a un projet scientifique, un État en fait pose demande une autorisation à un État qui est en train de définir la limite externe et qu'il n'y a pas de recommandation qui a été faite. Et donc l'interprétation que je donnais, c'était qu'il faut prendre en considération l'article 77 qui explique que l'État a des droits exclusifs et que donc ce n'est pas la définition du plateau continental qui donne la possibilité à l'État côtier de réguler la recherche scientifique marine, mais ses droits exclusifs, c'est la base de tout. L'article 77 est d'une nature coutumière, l'article 76 n'est pas vraiment de nature coutumière, il a été créé par UNCLOS. Et ce que j'ai envisagé aussi, c'était le cas où, même si ce n'est pas la position de la jurisprudence, mais je suis en désaccord, le cas aussi où il y avait en fait tout simplement un conflit entre deux États où la procédure de définition du plateau continental était bloquée auprès de la Commission, donc comme le cas par exemple de Bangladesh-Myanmar, et où il n'y a pas de délimitation entre les deux, donc pas de définition, pas de délimitation. Est-ce que ça veut dire que ça bloque les projets de recherche ? Et donc j'expliquais que pour débloquer cette situation, parce que ça peut prendre énormément d'années entre la définition et la délimitation, tout le monde sait que les procédures prennent énormément de temps, est-ce que ça doit porter préjudice à la recherche scientifique marine ? Et donc j'expliquais en fait qu'on peut utiliser d'autres dispositions de la Convention, et notamment tout ce qui est lié à la coopération, au fait par les États de devoir prévoir et faciliter la recherche scientifique marine, la promotion de la recherche scientifique marine, et de s'accorder au maximum pour faire des accords bilatéraux, multilatéraux pour débloquer en fait cette situation. Donc il pouvait en fait un État qui souhaite conduire un projet de scientifique marin sur une zone contestée pourrait très bien envisager de porter ce différend à la Cour, au tribunal ou devant un tribunal arbitral sur la base de la promotion, la facilitation de la recherche scientifique marine pour éviter de bloquer en fait ces projets pendant des années.
On ne va pas faire un débat entre vous et moi et d'autres éminents juristes dans la salle.
Une minute.
Non, même pas 30 secondes, puisque je suis en train d'annoncer la couleur, c'est que je ne vais pas relancer. Mais juste pour dire que je suis en particulier désaccord et profond sur l'analyse qui vient d'être faite. Et Dieu merci, elle a dit que c'était son analyse. Parce que ce n'est prouvé nulle part à ce jour dans le droit positif. On ne va pas en contentieux international sur une question de recherche scientifique marine. Il faut relire attentivement ce que dit la partie 15 sur le règlement des différends et la recherche scientifique marine. On ne va pas au contentieux sur cela. Et je vois mal, vraiment, la recherche scientifique marine devenir un enjeu d'une telle importance quand elle est prise en otage déjà dans les circonstances normales. J'intervenais sur ce point pour qu'on ne se lance pas dans des hypothèses qui, vraiment, à mon avis, ont quasiment peu de chances de se produire. Voilà. Mais, Monsieur le Président, merci pour votre indulgence. Je n'interviens plus, c'est promis de toute l'après-midi.
Je pense que ça vous donnera matière à débat pour le dîner.
Oh non, j'espère que le dîner, je ne vais pas débattre sur ce genre de questions. Merci beaucoup. Voilà.
Sur ce, si vous m'autorisez, I will move to our next speaker, so Pedro Madureira. Again, I will try to introduce him very shortly. He's a geologist with a PhD in geochemistry and petrology. He's now deputy head of the task group for the extension of the continental shelf, and he will speak about deep-sea marine mineral resources in the area, so this time in contrast to the previous to Albrecher, who spoke about outside from the area. So 20 minutes, if possible. Thanks.
I'll do my best. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Thank you very much to INDEMER, Madame Murphy. Merci beaucoup. It's always a pleasure to speak about deep-sea mining and deep-sea minerals. Well, I will try to address all these topics. I will do my best. And I'll try to start by doing a brief historical overview, because I think that this overview is important to understand the deep-sea minerals and how they appear. And I will go back, well, a bit further, but 1858, when people, a while ago, started to communicate by telegraph, using the Morse code. And of course, Morse and others immediately thought, why don't try to put a communication, a submarine cable, to link America to Europe, and doing this by communicating by telegraph. And of course, they made it by this time in 1858, but the cable was also operated for about 3 months. Then it turns to have some problems, and of course, they recovered the cable from the deep sea, and they were a bit surprised about the forms of life that became attached to the cable. And well, and it was mainly this problem to define the basins, the ocean basins, that drive that trip of Challenger. Back to the 1872, that lasted 4 years until 1876. It was the beginning of the oceanography. But in fact, what was the main driver for funding this mission by the Royal Society of London, it was the need to recognize the ocean basins in order to improve the communication between the continents. And it was well, not exactly the first time, but it was, I mean, the first time that in a more systematic way, they sampled a lot of things from the deep seabed. And it happens that they sample polymetallic nodules and ferromanganese crusts. They are black rocks, they are ugly rocks, and they didn't know what they were, and they call it that coal that does not burn. Well, and then, of course, we have the First World War, the Second World War, but nothing very much happened until the 60s. Well, and I must address, well, sorry, I forgot, because we are here in this house and we are in Monaco, I must stress the role of the Prince Albert of Monaco for the improvement of the oceanography science in Europe, and I will say also in Portugal. He fostered very much the oceanographic science in Portugal. He made at least 13 cruises to the Azores, and we have that expressed in our toponymy. We have the Princess Alice Bank, we have the Arundel Basin, which realized that the bank was a spot for the fishers at that time. The basin, the Arundel Basin, was the deepest basin in the Azores archipelago, and those are the names of the research vessels used by the Prince Albert. So then, okay, it happens not so much things on this subject, but in 1960, John Muir, an American, published this book, The Mineral Resources of the Sea. And he states in his book this phrase that in the oceans lie vast and developed resources of many of the materials needed by the industry. And it was a very known engineer at that time, and that drove many people, some consortia, to be formed and to go to harvest polymetallic nodules in the Pacific. And that happened back to the 70s, and by that time, they construct these impressive machines, and they made it. In fact, they harvested polymetallic nodules from the deep ocean in the Pacific Basin. But also, by that time, it started also the third conference of the United Nations on the Law of the Sea, and of course, there was also an issue of jurisdiction over these resources. They realized also that, harvesting nodules from a depth of 4,500 meters or more, it is really a difficult task. And also the price of the raw materials by that time, it was not also favorable to proceed with this project. So, and then in 1979, it was discovered the first hydrothermal vents also in the Pacific. And in 1982, we had the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That with the 1994 agreement, they put in place the International Seabed Authority, and we have the chance to have the present Secretary General with us, and the headquarters of the authorities in Jamaica, in Kingston, and it is supposed to administer and organize all the activities in the area in what concerns the mineral resources. Okay, what are these minerals resources in the area? As Harold already explained it, minerals in the area means minerals that are far away from the coastal states. So if we look to that Atlantic basin, and behind me you have the globe of the Atlantic basin with water, if we remove the water from this basin, these will be the main features, morphological features that we will see. The mid-ocean ridge, where along geological time the oceanic crust is created. You will see also a lot of seamounts that are also have a volcanic origin, but a volcanic origin outside the axis of the mid-ocean ridge. And you see the abyssal plains that are the deepest part of the basins with depths over the 4,500 meters. Well, these physiographic domains are important because usually they are related with the presence of some resources. In the basins, usually we can have a lot of polymetallic nodules, as Harold explained. In the flanks of the seamounts, this ferromanganese crust, and in the mid-ocean ridges, these hydrothermal vents, because this is due to the circulation of the seawater over these fractures, that there is a lot of permeability there. And these are resources because they potentially contain metals that we can use for our own, like in nodules, nickel and copper, but also manganese and cobalt eventually. In the crust, they are usually very rich in cobalt. They have high contents of rare earth elements, which are important, normally high contents of tellurium as well. And in polymetallic sulfides, you have copper, zinc, eventually lead in some cases, and many times also gold. Okay, the ISA established the regulations for the exploration of these resources for the nodules back in 2000, for the sulfides in 2010, and the crust 2012. And if we look to the progress of these exploration contracts that are a result from applications from several contractors, well, we have here, back in 2001, it was when the contracts from these pioneer people that invested back in the 70s, they signed contract with the ISA, and then nothing happens very much until 2010, and after that, it increases the number of explorations enormously. And with the International Seabed Authority, we have now about 26 contracts going on. And this is very, you will find a lot of sponsoring states sponsoring these activities. You will see developed countries like France, Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, and you will see some developing countries like the Kingdom of Tonga, Nauru, Cook Island, well, and some developing countries that you won't find so developing as Singapore, but there's a lot, a high range of sponsoring states supporting these activities in the area. And if we look to the main area, which is in the Pacific Basin, the Clarion-Clipperton area, well, you will see in colored the present contracts for the several contractors. Here in these areas with these oblique lines are reserved areas that are to be used for developing countries. That's why this classification of developing countries is important, because the convention is trying to help developing countries to do activities in the area. And you have these big squares, these big areas that, well, that for now, for the time being, they are more or less marine protected areas that are used for conservation measures of the ecosystems around this Clarion-Clipperton zone. Okay, I have here the maps of the other contracts, but Harold already shown that, so I will skip that. It is only important for you to know this, for instance, the Indian Basin, where you can see that the areas for the polymetallic nodules can reach, by the end of the contract of exploration, 75,000 square kilometers, so they are really big. And these are blocks for the sulfides, for instance, which are much smaller. But there is a lot of activity also in the Indian, and then you will see this is the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic. You can find this information all in the ISA website. So challenges to go and to try to harvest these seabed minerals. Well, the first one is the depth. This is a profile coming from the coastal state, well, to the area, and you can see that the polymetallic sulfides or the crusts or the nodules are at depths really higher than 1,500 meters, and for the nodules, much higher than 4,500 meters. So this is a big challenge, and of course, for these depths, you have no light reaching the seafloor. So the first thing, you must rely on indirect methods in order to know the morphology of the seafloor. And you can do that easily by using the multi-beam sensors that you can put in the vessel. And you can reach these morphologies that you can see here. And these are acoustic beams. So you put an acoustic beam inside the water. The beams reach the seafloor, they are reflected, and if you know the velocity of the sound in the water column, you can determine the bathymetry. And more or less, the rule of thumb is that you can map an area 3 times more than the depth of the water column that you are sailing. But of course, with these systems, you can reach very good resolutions, for instance, between 50 or 75 meters of resolution, which is quite good. But maybe, sometimes it's not enough, because if you have an area, and you can see here a lower resolution, you can easily see the higher areas at lower depths. But if you increase the resolution, you will see a lot of new things. So if the resolution in this side is about 50 to 75 meters, for instance, and if you are trying to developing a technology, a crawler, for instance, to go to the seabed to harvest the deep sea minerals, you don't want this to happen. So you don't want to be surprised by some of these dips, some of these crests or fractures that appeared in this area. So in some cases, then, you need to have a higher resolution of your seabed in order to develop the technology. And this is much more time-consuming, because to do that, you must map near the seafloor. And you can do that using submersibles, using ROVs, or using AUVs. But you are sailing near the seafloor, and of course, the thickness of the beam, the lateral thickness of the beam will be much lower. So it will take a lot of time for you to map all the seabed, all your area of interest with these systems. So this is a big challenge. And then when you do that, and in the case for nodules, for instance, you need to determine the abundance. And this is a very high abundance, in the area of the Pacific, I think in the EEZ of Japan. And you need to determine the abundance, because for the nodules, the abundance is equal to tonnage. And tonnage is a parameter that is crucial in this business. And the good thing about the nodules is that it's an easy deposit because it's a 2D deposit. You only have the lateral directions, X and Y. You don't have thickness. So when you do that, you determine the abundance. You need to know that if the abundance, I mean, if it keeps constant over the two directions or if it changes. And of course, you also need to know the metal content that you are interested in and to see if the concentrations are also changing, because this is crucial to develop your business model and to know if you can operate an economic project or not. So this will be for nodules, but more or less, I mean, the analog, in order to harvesting this, because there is no technology yet, I will put this analog. It will be easy. It's like farming. So you will collect nodules that are lying on the top of the seabed. And probably you must use, well, several machines, because in order to be economic, most contractors say, well, we'll need 2 to 3 million tons a year of nodules. Well, and you can develop several strategies. Either you put the nodules, you harvest the nodules up front, or you can concentrate the nodules into some lines, and then you'll get another machine to collect these nodules along these directions. Well, this will be for nodules case. For sulfides, this is a bit more complex because you have the thickness of the deposit. You have is a deposit with 3 dimensions. So you need to drill. It is if you have thickness to evaluate, you need to drill. So you must develop these systems. This is, for instance, the case that was used by Nautilus Minerals that Harold already mentioned. And you can use some other methods, for instance, the electrical resistivity, because sulfides in veins display very low resistivity, and so they can be a very good property to measure in this deposit. But it takes time because you need to drill. Well, in the case of the sulfide deposits, the sulfide deposits are really small. They are really, unless until now, the deposits that are now are really small. So this is the project that Nautilus developed for the Papua New Guinea. These machines are already in place, they already did it, and they are waiting for the production vessel to start to operate. And they have all these machines because, I mean, they must dig, they must excavate because you have this 3rd dimension. This is even more difficult for crust, because for crust, what is difficult in crust is that, well, mostly crusts are like that. The most thicker crust will have about 25 or 30 centimeters, so it will be very difficult to see a technology developed just to harvest this thickness. And you see that it is quite irregular. And you can see this in the end specimen, and you can see also these kind of things in the deep sea floor. So it will be very difficult to develop technology for harvesting crust. And I think we are far away from that for crust. I think it will be much easier for nodules and for sulfides, as already Nautilus started to do it. So I will focus my presentation more in the nodules, because I think they will be the most important ones. Most of the contracts over 16 are now for the polymetallic nodules with the International Seabed Authority. So, and then when you know about your deposit, you have a lot of geological knowledge about your deposit, then you can try to develop your business, your economic model. And there is this thing that people usually are not aware is that resources are different from reserves. Reserves are the economic part of a deposit, of a resource. So reserves are exploited. What are exploited by contractors are the reserves. So in mineral resources in this column, this represents the increase of geological knowledge. You have inferred when you don't know so much, and then you can have indicated and measured resources that you can change this knowledge into reserves. But it depends on what is called the modifying factors to see if the project is economic. For instance, do you have technology to go there? Because if not, you cannot go to this side. You will remain in the resource side. Do you have the legal framework? Well, in fact, we don't have. We are doing that in the ISA now. We are putting the exploitation regulations in place. And for instance, the environmental impacts. The impacts will be accepted by the society because there will be always an impact. So I will take some environmental issues, and again, I will take this analog. And imagine that this is a machine that is operating in 4,500 meters depth in the ocean. It is difficult for you to imagine because you see a person there, so I will help you. And now it seems to be really a machine moving on the deep sea floor. And the main environmental issues with harvesting the deep sea minerals is really, well, the development of a sediment plume. So we will put some toxic metals to the water column, and then you will remove the top layer of sediment there. It is really important for bentonic organisms. And also you will have the sediment compaction because of the weight of the machine. So these are really important impacts that we must understand. And we must understand, and in order to understand that, contractors need to acquire a lot of baseline data. And this is really important because if they have a serious exploration program, they will start to recover baseline data since the beginning. And it will be very important to have this data to understand the impact. This is not saying that you don't have an impact, because some people say that it is possible to harvest mineral resources without killing any organism. You cannot do it. But if you understand the impacts, you can mitigate them, and you can constrain your project and to know what you want to achieve. And also, I mean, the contractors are collecting so much data that the ISA is very keen to put this into a proper database that can be used by the science community, at least the environmental data. And we are very, very, very keen to do this as soon as possible. Well, but you will have some environmental impacts always. So the question is, do we really need to go to deep sea mining? I would say probably yes, and this is really my personal opinion. And I will put this picture because I think that this can be the driver to that. This is after the Paris Conference on Climate Change, and of course, it is good that the world, because you have all the world there taking actions to reduce the CO2 emissions, which is, I think it is really important. But people are not really aware that the renewable energies are really demanding in terms of metallic resources. So if we pick up, for instance, the news that happened after this conference, some European countries said that we'll stop selling conventional cars by 2050. Netherlands said even more than that. They say after 2025, they won't sell conventional cars. They will use only electric or hybrid cars. But in a conventional car, for instance, I can have 25 kilos of copper. In an hybrid or electric car, I will have 3 times more and much more metals. And I will take one, for example, the nickel that are used in batteries, nickel, cobalt, they are always in these batteries for these cars. And in 2014, it was used 13,000 tons of nickel to produce these batteries. And the prediction is in 10 years, you can multiply this by a factor of 10. So you will need 13,000 tons of nickel. And the interesting thing on this is that this is bottom-up approach. Governments are taking actions because people want that. So people are asking for that. We want to produce in 10 years more 30,000 tons of nickel. And here you have the production of nickel, the volume of production of nickel in a year. This was made by a Canadian colleague. And so in this volume, in 10 years, we'll need to have this volume. So this will come from the deep sea, or this is coming from other sources, because the other nickel sources, most of them are in equatorial and tropical forests, what we want to do. And well, I just want to point to, going to the conclusion, that this is the area, here is this red dot, is the area that can be easily estimated, taking into account the density of nodules in order to get an economic project, and consider the exploitation of 2 to 3 million tons of nodules a year, this will be the size of the area that we'll need to ensure the mining for 50 to 100 years. So you can compare this area with the size of these big squares that I told you that are the marine protected areas in this area. And you can think about it. Well, in conclusion, I will finish the same way I started. I mean, when we see all this evolution, when we think back to 1858, by this communication by telegraph, I mean, now it seems so primitive. People are trying to communicate, knocking the finger into this device is almost ridiculous. Well, or not. But what I wanted to say is that now we have about 300 submarine cables ensuring more than 95% of our global communications. So we want the same things that people wanted 200 years ago. The problem is that, I mean, we are more dependent on technology. We want cell phones, we want computers, laptops, iPods, we want to fly to everywhere in the holidays time. And the problem is that we are too many people wanting the same thing. And this is really the challenge. Thank you very much.
So I've been asked to speak today on the freedom of marine scientific research on the seabed. And I think the previous presentations actually lead up very nicely to some of the things that I want to say this afternoon. You'll notice from the program and the slide that the title of my presentation comes with a question mark, as if there is some doubt as to whether the freedom to carry out marine scientific research in relation to the seabed actually exists or not. Well, I didn't put the question mark there, the organizers did. And in fact, it's not my intention to suggest that there is no freedom of marine scientific research in the seabed. What I will argue, however, is that the Law of the Sea Convention does draw an important distinction between marine scientific research in the high seas, conducted under Article 87, and marine scientific research in the area under Article 256 of the Convention. So what I want to do in the first part of my talk is to explore some of the differences between these two categories of marine scientific research and identify some of the potential constraints and difficulties that might arise. I'm also going to suggest that some provisions are not being implemented to their full extent, and that it is time, or actually beyond time, that states and the International Seabed Authority made more effort to implement the provisions of the Convention in the spirit in which they were intended. So first, let's look at the provisions of the Convention. So Article 256, all states and competent international organizations may conduct marine scientific research in the area. It's clear, it's free, but it must be conducted in conformity with the provisions of Part 11. So the relevant provision in Part 11 is Article 143. Now, it contains quite a lot of words, and I don't need you to read it on the slide. You can read it in the book. But the main point is that it is immediately clear, when you look at paragraph 1 of Article 143, that marine scientific research in the area is treated quite differently to marine scientific research in the high seas. Paragraph 1 says that MSR in the area shall be carried out exclusively for peaceful purposes. Well, okay, that's the same as any other type of MSR, but also for the benefit of mankind as a whole. And the question is, how is the benefit of mankind to be realized in this respect? Paragraphs 2 and 3 of Article 143 give us some indication. So paragraph 2, I think somebody mentioned it this morning, says that the authority may carry out MSR concerning the area, may enter into contracts for that purpose, and shall actively promote and encourage the conduct of marine scientific research in the area and coordinate the results of that research. Paragraph 3 goes on to describe the ways in which the authority and states parties should promote international cooperation in MSR, for example, establishing international programs, disseminating the results and analysis through the authority as may be appropriate. But most importantly, perhaps, paragraph 3 also requires states parties to ensure that programs are developed through the authority or other international organizations, and I'm thinking, for example, of IOC UNESCO, specifically with a view to benefiting developing states and technologically less developed states, with a view to strengthening their research capabilities, training their personnel, and enabling their personnel to take part in marine scientific research in the area. Now, those provisions, they're in the 1982 Convention, but they remain unaffected by the 1994 Implementation Agreement, yet very little attention has been paid to their implementation in practice. There have been a number of scientific research projects carried out through the authority. Somebody this morning mentioned the Kaplan project in the early 2000s that looked into species range and diversity in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. There was also a project to coordinate the production of a geologic model for the Clarion-Clipperton zone conducted through the authority, and several reports and technical studies have been published by the authority. There have also been other efforts, including mandatory training programs for scientists from developing countries as a requirement of contracts with the authority, an endowment fund for marine scientific research in the area, which has so far provided training opportunities to more than 100 individuals from 46 different developing countries. But when we consider the scale of the scientific research that is needed in relation to the deep seabed, some of the things that were described by Pedro just now, we can see that these efforts are really quite modest. And there are serious constraints. The endowment fund, for example, has only $3.5 million. And the entire budget for marine scientific research for the authority for 2017 to 18 is $148,000. Almost meaningless amounts, quite frankly, when you consider that the cost of a research vessel is $100,000 a day. Of course, this isn't to say that marine scientific research has not been taking place. There are many international projects. I can mention, for example, the International Ocean Discovery Program. There is a World Register of Marine Species, and many programs coordinated through IOC UNESCO. There are a number of recent programs targeted specifically at the deep seabed. I'm thinking of programs like the Midas Project and the Joint Program for Investigation of the Oceans, coordinated both by the European Union, and both those have contributed enormously to the state of knowledge relating to environmental impacts of deep seabed mining. So these are all good, but really I can't help thinking that we are missing an opportunity. Marine scientific research needs to be better coordinated. Scarce resources need to be better directed towards priority research needs. And some of these are demonstrated by projects such as the Midas project, such as study of ecosystem functions, species connectivity, and modeling of plumes to deal with the problem that Pedro outlined so well. I'd suggest that the authority has an important role to play in this. not only in coordinating research where appropriate, but also providing a forum where member states, sponsoring states, and contractors can come together to agree on priority research areas and identify potential areas of cooperation. And at the same time, of course, the authority can provide a vehicle for ensuring the full participation of developing countries in those research activities. So for the second part of my talk, I wanted to turn to cover some of the potentially problematic issues with respect to marine scientific research. So first, let me point out that the practical reality that many of the activities that are frequently carried out as marine scientific research, you see some on the slide, and you saw many in Pedro's presentation, these are also activities that are normally carried out as part of a deep seabed mineral exploration campaign. The activities include things like side-scan sonar mapping, using AUVs, box coring, multi-core sampling, CTD probes, and deployment of ROVs for things like high-density photo profiling. Pretty much anything apart from drilling could either be marine scientific research or it could be exploration. The point is, though, that when carried out under a contract for exploration with the authority, all of these activities would be considered activities in the area as covered by Article 1 of the Convention and therefore regulated. It would also carry with it certain legal consequences. For example, ISA contractors are required to observe rigorous environmental standards and to monitor the impacts of their activities in exploration areas. At the same time, in return for that, contractors are granted time-bound but exclusive rights over the areas that are allocated to them for exploration. The authority itself is under a legal obligation to ensure that no other entity operates in the same area in a manner that might interfere with the operations of the contractor. So what happens when the interests of contractors and the interests of marine scientific researchers collide? This could happen, for example, if a scientific research project decides to take samples or conduct detailed bathymetric surveys in a contractor's exploration area. On the face of it, there's nothing to prevent that, but it does raise a number of complex and quite sensitive issues. So again, let's see what the Convention has to say about this. Well, the key provision is Article 147. Paragraph 1 states that activities in the area, so exploration, shall be carried out with reasonable regard for other activities in the marine environment. There's then a reciprocal provision in paragraph 3, which requires other activities in the marine environment to be conducted with reasonable regard for activities in the area. So it's a dual obligation. Paragraph 3 actually follows Article 87, which requires high seas freedoms, including the freedom of marine scientific research, to be exercised with due regard for the rights under the Convention with respect to activities in the area. Now, these terms, due regard and reasonable regard, they're not actually defined in the Convention. We could probably say that they mean the same thing, although different words are used, and actually in the French text, the formulation is different. But I leave it to you to consider whether there's any meaning in that. Certainly, the Virginia commentary, which we always turn to in these cases, suggests that they are the same and that reasonable regard would require the recognition of the right of all states to conduct activities in the marine environment and the recognition of the obligation on all states to protect and preserve the marine environment as set out in Article 192 and that Virginie covered in her speech. In any case, I would suggest that it's reasonable to conclude that MSR activities in the area must not unreasonably interfere with the contractor's rights and duties under its contract with the authority. At the same time, contractors, researchers, and sponsoring states of the contractor and the state responsible for the researcher's activities have to give due regard to the rights of each other to conduct their activity without undue interference with the activities of the other. It does, however, remain rather unclear what level of interference or what kind of interference would exceed that standard of reasonable regard. And the current provisions in the Convention just by themselves, even though there are many other examples where the words due regard are used in the Convention, and some of them are on the screen, but it seems to me to fall short of giving any real practical guidance either to the scientific community or to the deep-sea mining community as to exactly what they should do and what actions or consequences may amount to undue interference. For example, is there a requirement of notification or prior exchange of information? We don't know. It's very hard to read one into the provisions. And there's no specific provision, either in the Convention or in the ISA regulations, that deals with the situation where the conduct of MSR in the area directly affects the rights of a contractor. Not even a requirement requiring notice to be given to the contractor or to the authority of the intention to conduct marine scientific research. Now, there's another difficulty that arises, and that is where the activity that is carried out as marine scientific research, if it was carried out by a contractor with the authority, would actually be regulated. And I can give you an example. Contractors have numerous environmental obligations, including the obligation to establish environmental baselines, to conduct monitoring programs, and there are certain categories of activity when they are carried out by contractors during exploration that require prior environmental impact assessment. An example is sampling by epibenthic sledge. Again, an activity that is frequently carried out. In this case, a contractor is required to submit a prior environmental impact assessment to the ISA at least 1 year prior to the activity taking place. Yet if it's carried out by a marine scientific researcher as MSR, there is no clear requirement to carry out a prior environmental impact assessment. It's true that there might be national obligations or there may be regional instruments that could apply or be relevant, but there's very little consistency. For example, in Germany, researchers are obliged to follow the OSPAR Code of Conduct for responsible marine scientific research at all times, regardless of whether the activity is carried out in the OSPAR Convention area or elsewhere, including in the area. There are also voluntary codes of conduct that are used by industries, such as the Interridge Code of Conduct on hydrothermal vent systems and the Code of Conduct of the International Marine Minerals Society. But the position is quite unclear and quite fragmented. So how do we resolve these inconsistencies? Well, again, the Convention gives us some guidance. Article 240D of the Convention requires that marine scientific research is conducted in compliance with all regulations adopted in conformity with the Convention, including those for the protection of the marine environment. Then we have Articles 205 and 206, requiring states parties to conduct environmental assessments of planned activities under their jurisdiction and control. And I would suggest that that should logically include those sort of activities that would be regulated if they were carried out under contract to the authority. And I would very much agree with Virginie that the 2011 advisory opinion of the Seabed Disputes Chamber at least makes a strong implication that the requirement to conduct environmental impact assessments to cover activities in the area is implicit. So, to conclude, and I have tried to go as quickly as possible. I'm sorry if I went too quickly, bearing in mind the time. The first point is that open and extensive marine scientific research, both in the high seas and in the area, is necessary and desirable for many reasons. Nobody wants to prevent it. Data from MSR helps to provide the knowledge base for the formulation of regulations for exploitation. Sound environmental management of the area is likely to require very large databases that are difficult and costly for individual contractors to acquire, as well as analytics that are beyond the scale at which individual contractors and even governments can operate. And a complete environmental impact assessment, even of a mine site, is very likely not going to be possible based solely on a single contractor's exploration area, but requires us to have a much bigger picture across environmental gradients. So cooperation in MSR is indispensable. On the other hand, contractors are required to observe strict environmental standards and to monitor the impacts of their activities in their exploration areas. It may be the case that activities conducted by third parties as MSR could interfere with the contractor's ongoing efforts, for example, to monitor the environmental impacts of their activities. The question of how to reconcile the competing interests of contractors and researchers raises a number of complex and sensitive legal questions and concerns that are by no means answered by a strict reading of the Convention. Furthermore, I would suggest that the need to guarantee the security of tenure for contractors on the one side and the exercise of the rights and freedoms of marine scientific research on the other side are both essential for good governance and good administration of the mineral resources of the area. All these issues, I would respectfully suggest to you, need to be dealt with in a manner that is consistent with the relevant provisions of the Convention, and we would do well to study them and try to gain a common understanding of where those provisions take us and how to deal with these problems that are really beginning to become very real problems. So with that food for thought, I thank you very much. I apologize if I went a little over the time, but I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Michael. Well, yes, this time. Thank you, Michael. You were perfectly on time, and I think that was a very useful and illuminating presentation to conclude this afternoon. If the organizer allow time for one or two questions, one question. So one. Who will ask the one single question of the end of the session? So there is none. So that we solve the problem. So there is one. Frédéric, we can always count on you. Okay, Frédéric.
Oui, I'd like to ask a question to Michael Lodge, which is a candid question, okay? From your extensive experience inside ESA, and from, say, a conservationist perspective, which, as you know better than me, the deep sea biodiversity is particularly fragile and unknown. It is particularly fragile because the deep sea environment is quite stable oceanographically. So if you bring a disturbance, I mean, it's very likely to be very, very impacting compared to more surface water areas and biodiversity. Now, since we know so little about the hotspot of deep sea biodiversity, except say we know that sea mounts, for example, or thermal vents, of course, are rich in new species, how easily is it to grant concession for exploration with some high-impacting techniques of exploration to vast areas which are poorly known? So how do you protect yourself in ESA from, you know, from passing over the red line? I mean, how is the principle of precaution taken into account in reality? This is a candid question. I don't know how that operates.
In 1 minute, probably.
Okay.
No, two.
Well, yes, thanks for the question. You know, it's impossible to generalize, I think, because yes, deep sea environments are comparatively unknown. Many of areas are unknown, but some areas are better known than others. And I think it came through very clearly from Pedro's talk, for example, that exploration in the Clarion-Clipperton zone has been continuing for in excess of 30 years. We have quite a good body of knowledge. We also have very rigorous controls on exploration activities with requirements for tremendous amounts of baseline data to be collected and requirements for ongoing monitoring. And as I was trying to bring out in the talk, really quite stringent requirements for any activity that has a potential to cause environmental impact, requiring an EIA to be submitted to the ISA 1 year in advance. In the case of nodules, for any sampling over, I think, 1,000 or 10,000? 10,000 square meters. And in the case of crusts and sulfides, very, very much smaller areas. So these are applications, these are practical applications of the precautionary approach. Nobody is yet approaching the stage of exploitation. We're still very much in the exploration phase, still characterizing the resource, characterizing the biodiversity, and characterizing the potential impacts of technology that is yet to be fully understood. But the technology clearly to be developed in line with the requirements of the authority as regards minimizing, preventing, and reducing all forms of pollution. So, you know, I think it's impossible to make a generalization of the whole of the area because the different resources have totally different characteristics, totally different biodiversity, totally different locations, and the scale of the projects is also a very significant factor to be taken into account. You know, the nodules are two-dimensional resource, so the areas are relatively large, but in the case of sulfides and crusts, the exploration blocks are actually very, very small in comparison to the geological setting and the environmental setting in which you find them. So I hope that's okay for a short answer.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer, Michael. So this brings our afternoon session to its end. This also, let me thank our 4 speakers for their contributions. That was quite easy to chair or to moderate. This also brings my task to its end, and I hope you will forgive me for this 20 minutes, being 20 minutes late on schedule, but not on schedule, but anyway. So, thank you very much, and have a good evening and good dinner this evening. So, thanks.